Her blind eyes had never opened in 7 years, until the moment her fingers touched the cold marble face of the Virgin Mary. The cathedral froze, the stone grew warm, and then Elena whispered words no one could explain. "Mama, I can see her." But what she saw next was nothing the doctors, the priest, or even her parents were ready for. Welcome back, my beautiful family and friends. I've missed you all, and the amazing moments we share here. Your presence means everything, and I'm so grateful to have you with me on this journey. If you're ready to dive into today's story, hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I love seeing how far this family reaches. And trust me, tomorrow I'll be bringing you another story you won't want to miss. Now, let's get straight into it. The morning light that Elena couldn't see painted golden streaks across the kitchen walls of their modest home in San Miguel. She sat at the worn wooden table, her fingertips dancing across the surface, reading the story of countless family meals carved into its grain, scratches from her older brother Miguel's homework, the smooth depression where her father's coffee cup had rested for 15 years, the slight warp where her mother had once set down a hot pot too quickly. "Mija, your eggs are getting cold," Maria Vasquez called softly, though she knew Elena would find them by their warmth and the gentle steam that tickled her nose. Elena smiled, her dark eyes fixed on a point somewhere beyond the kitchen window, seeing nothing yet, somehow taking in everything. "They smell like sunshine, Mama." Maria's breath caught. 7 years, and her daughter still found ways to describe a world she'd never seen with words that cut straight to the heart. The doctors had been clear from birth. Elena's optic nerves had never developed. There would be no surgery, no miracle of modern medicine, only darkness, forever. But if the doctors could see Elena now, Maria thought, they might question their certainty about miracles. Elena's fork found the eggs with practiced precision. Around her, the morning symphony played out in layers. She knew better than any sighted person knew their reflection. The neighbor's rooster calling from 3 houses down. Mrs. Santos sweeping her front steps in that particular rhythm. Scritch, scritch, pause, scritch, scritch, pause. Her father's heavy boots on the wooden porch as he returned from checking on their small garden. "The tomatoes are coming in beautiful, Elena," Papa called as he entered, his voice carrying that special warmth he reserved for her. "Want to feel how big they're getting?" Elena's face lit up like a candle being struck. "See, Papa!" She rose from the table with the fluid grace of someone who had mapped every inch of their small home through touch and repetition. Her hand trailed along the table's edge, then found the doorframe, then the rough texture of the porch railing. Papa guided her small hand to the largest tomato, and Elena gasped. "It's like holding a little sun," she whispered, her palm cupping the warm, firm fruit. "I can feel how red it is." Papa's eyes met Maria's over Elena's head. How did she know? How could a child who had never seen color describe it with such certainty? "How do you know about red, Mija?" Maria asked gently, settling beside them in the garden. Elena tilted her head, considering the question with the serious expression she wore when thinking deeply. "It feels warm and alive, like when I touch your cheek when you're happy, Mama, or like how my heart feels when I pray to Maria Santissima, the Virgin Mary." Elena spoke of her often, with the intimate familiarity of a child talking about a beloved grandmother. Maria had started taking Elena to the small church down the street when she was barely 3, thinking the ritual and community might provide comfort for their unusual circumstances. She hadn't expected Elena to develop such a profound spiritual connection. "Tell me about your dreams again, Elena," Papa said softly, lifting her up to sit on the porch step beside him. Elena's face grew thoughtful, distant. "Last night, I dreamed I was walking in a big, beautiful place with tall walls that reached toward heaven, and there were colors everywhere, not like the colors you tell me about, but colors that sing. And she was there. She? Maria Santissima. She had the most beautiful hands, Papa, soft like Mama's but with little scars that looked like stars, and she was wearing blue. Not the blue of the sky you describe, but the blue of peace, the blue of love." Elena paused, her small fingers tracing patterns on the wooden step. "She told me she was waiting for me." Maria felt her heart skip. For months now, Elena had been having these vivid dreams, describing a place that sounded remarkably like the Grand Cathedral in the capital city, a place Elena had never been, had never even heard described in detail. Waiting for you where? Mija? At her special place, where people come to touch her and feel her love. Elena's voice dropped to a whisper. She says I need to come soon, that she has something to show me. The silence stretched between them, filled with the weight of unspoken possibilities. Maria had heard the stories, of course, the cathedral 3 hours away, where they said the statue of the Virgin Mary had been weeping tears of oil, where miracles were whispered about in hushed, reverent tones. But miracles were for other people, weren't they? For people with more faith, more deserving hearts. Elena stood suddenly. Her face turned toward the morning sun she couldn't see. We're going to go there, aren't we, Mama? To see her. Maria looked at her husband, saw the same mixture of hope and fear in his eyes that she felt in her own heart. They had so little money. The trip would cost everything they had saved for Elena's future care. But the way Elena stood there, so certain, so filled with quiet joy, as if she already knew something beautiful was waiting. "Sí, mija," Maria whispered, the words coming from some deep place of faith she thought she'd lost years ago. "We'll find a way." Elena smiled, and for just a moment, Maria could have sworn her daughter's dark eyes caught the light like mirrors reflecting something unseen but infinitely bright. 3 weeks later, their old pickup truck rattled down the cobblestone streets of the capital, every bump and pothole echoing through Elena's bones. She sat pressed between her parents, her small hands folded in her lap, but her entire body hummed with an energy that had been building since they'd left home at dawn. "We're close now, mija," Papa said, though his voice carried the weight of their sacrifices. They'd sold Maria's wedding ring, his fishing equipment, and borrowed against next month's wages. Everything for this moment that might be nothing more than a child's vivid imagination. But Elena knew better. She could feel it, a pulling in her chest, like a string connecting her heart to something vast and loving just ahead. The air itself felt different here, thicker with prayer and hope and centuries of whispered pleas. "There," Maria whispered, and Elena felt the truck slow. "Catedral de Nuestra Señora de los Milagros." Even through the closed windows, Elena could hear it, the sound of faith made audible, footsteps on ancient stone, the soft murmur of prayers in a dozen languages, the rustle of clothing as people knelt and rose and knelt again. And underneath it all, a deep, resonant hum that seemed to come from the very walls themselves. "It's singing," Elena whispered. "What's singing, mija?" Papa asked as he helped her from the truck. "The church. Can't you hear it?" Elena tilted her head, her entire being focused on that celestial harmony only she seemed to perceive. "It's her song." Maria's hand found Elena's shoulder as they approached the massive wooden doors. Even Elena could sense the cathedral's immensity, the way sound expanded and echoed, the coolness that spoke of thick stone walls, the subtle shift in air pressure that told of soaring ceilings reaching toward heaven. "Oh," Elena breathed as they stepped inside. The sensory assault was immediate and overwhelming. Incense wrapped around her like silk scarves, carrying notes of frankincense and myrrh and something else, something that smelled like starlight, if starlight had a scent. Her bare sandals touched marble so ancient and worn that it felt soft as skin beneath her feet, but it was the presence that stopped her breath entirely. Elena had felt the Virgin Mary in her dreams, had sensed her gentle watching during prayers at their small neighborhood church. But this was like standing in the heart of love itself. The presence filled every corner of the vast space, as real and tangible as her mother's embrace, but infinitely larger. "Where is she?" Elena whispered, her voice small in the cathedral's vastness, an elderly priest materiating beside them, his cassock rustling softly. "Ah, la niña pequeña, I am Father Miguel. You have come to see Nuestra Señora?" "She's been waiting for me," Elena said with the matter-of-fact certainty that had been frightening and enchanting her parents for months. Father Miguel's weathered face softened. In 30 years of serving this cathedral, he had seen countless pilgrims arrive with desperate hopes and heavy hearts, but there was something about this small, sightless girl that made the air itself seem to shimmer with possibility. Then we must not keep her waiting, he said gently. He led them through the cathedral, past clusters of pilgrims lighting candles and whispering novenas. Elena's head turned constantly, not seeing but somehow tracking something the rest of them couldn't perceive. There are angels here, she murmured to her mother. Lots of them. They're singing too. Maria's throat tightened. She wanted to believe. But 7 years of doctors and specialists and gentle, crushing disappointments had built walls around her hope. What if this was just another, "Here she is, mija"? They had stopped before a side chapel, smaller and more intimate than the main altar. And there, bathed in the soft glow of hundreds of votive candles, stood the statue of the Virgin Mary that had been drawing pilgrims for over 2 centuries. Elena went completely still. The statue was magnificent, carved from white marble with such skill that the folds of Mary's robe seemed to move in the flickering candlelight. Her face was turned slightly downward. Eyes closed in serene contemplation, hands pressed together in prayer. But it was more than artistic mastery that drew people here. There was something alive in that marble, something that watched and waited and loved with infinite patience. "Can I?" Elena's voice was barely a whisper. "Can I touch her?" Father Miguel hesitated. The statue was priceless, protected by centuries of reverent care, but something in Elena's expression, the way she stood trembling with barely contained joy, made him nod. "Sí, mija," but very gently. Elena stepped forward on legs that shook like new leaves. Her parents flanked her, ready to catch her if she fell, but she moved with the steady determination of someone following a path only she could see. 3 steps, 2, 1. Her small hands rose, hovering inches from the statue's face. The marble seemed to glow brighter in the candlelight, or perhaps it was Elena herself who was glowing, her face transformed by an expression of wonder so pure it brought tears to every eye watching. "Hello," she whispered. "I've been dreaming about you." And then her fingertips touched the Virgin Mary's carved cheek. The cathedral fell silent, not the natural quiet of hushed reverence, but a complete, profound stillness, as if the very air was holding its breath. Even the ever-present hum of prayers and shuffling feet stopped entirely. Elena's eyes, which had been dark and still for 7 years, began to flutter. "Mama," she whispered, her voice filled with wonder and something that might have been recognition. "Mama, something's happening." The marble beneath her fingers grew warm. The marble was no longer cold stone beneath Elena's fingertips. It pulsed with warmth, like touching a living heartbeat carved in white. Her eyes, which had never known light, began to move behind closed lids, rapid and purposeful, as if chasing something beautiful in a dream. "Elena?" Maria's voice cracked with hope and terror in equal measure. "I can see her," Elena whispered, her voice filled with wonder. "She's so beautiful, Mama. She has stars in her hair, and her eyes are like Papa's when he looks at the garden after rain." But Elena's own eyes remained closed. Father Miguel stepped closer, his weathered hands clasped so tightly his knuckles had gone white. In 30 years of serving this cathedral, he had heard countless claims of miracles, had blessed holy water over desperate prayers that went unanswered. But something was happening here that made the very air around them shimmer with possibility. "Mija," Papa whispered, his voice rough with unshed tears. "Open your eyes." Elena's small hands remained pressed against the Virgin Mary's face, and she shook her head slightly. "Not yet. She's showing me things. Beautiful things." A tear slipped down her cheek. "She says I have to be ready. That seeing isn't just about eyes, it's about understanding." Around them, other pilgrims had begun to notice the commotion. A woman with a sick baby pressed closer, her eyes wide with desperate hope. An elderly man leaning heavily on a wooden cane shuffled forward, his weathered face transformed with awe. Word spread through the cathedral in whispers that grew louder, more urgent. "Es un milagro," someone breathed. "The blind girl, look at her face. She's glowing." And she was. Elena's entire being seemed illuminated from within, as if the candlelight had found a way to live beneath her skin. Her dark hair, usually so ordinary, caught the light like spun silk. Her small hands against the marble statue looked like they belonged in a Renaissance painting. innocent, sacred, impossibly beautiful. "What is she showing you, mija?" Maria asked softly, kneeling beside her daughter. Elena's face grew thoughtful, distant, as if she were watching something unfold in a realm beyond the physical cathedral. "Colors," she whispered, "but not like the ones you've described to me. These are alive. The red of love, the gold of joy, the blue of infinite peace. And she's wearing them all, Mama. She's made of light and love and—" Elena paused, searching for words, "and the tears of every mother who ever prayed for her child." Maria's breath caught. She had prayed those exact words, alone in her kitchen in the dark hours before dawn, when she thought no one, not even God, was listening. "She knows about your tears, Mama," Elena continued, her voice soft but certain. "She's kept everyone. They're like diamonds in her crown." The crowd around them had grown larger. Someone was sobbing, deep, wrenching sobs of recognition and hope. Father Miguel found himself praying words he hadn't used since seminary, ancient Latin phrases that seemed to rise from his soul without conscious thought. "Elena," a new voice said gently. Dr. Rodriguez, the cathedral's physician, had pushed through the crowd. He had been called to document what might be another false miracle, another desperate family clinging to impossible hope. But looking at Elena now, his medical skepticism wavered. May I examine your eyes?" Elena turned toward his voice, and for a moment, everyone held their breath. Her eyes opened. They were no longer the flat, unseeing dark they had been since birth. Instead, they held depth, movement, the subtle tracking motion of sight. But when Dr. Rodriguez held up his hand directly in front of her face, Elena didn't react. "I can't see you yet," she said matter-of-factly, "but I can see her, and through her, I can see—" Elena paused, her face scrunching in concentration. "Everything that matters." "What do you mean, mija?" Papa asked, his voice barely steady. Elena finally stepped back from the statue, her hands falling to her sides. She turned in a slow circle, her eyes open but unfocused, as if seeing something no one else could perceive. "I can see your heart, Papa. It's golden and worried and full of love that tastes like morning coffee and smells like tomatoes." She turned to her mother. "And yours, Mama. Oh, it's so beautiful. Blue like deep water, with little lights that are all the lullabies you sang to me." She faced Dr. Rodriguez. "Yours is careful and kind, but it has gray edges where you stop believing in things you couldn't measure." The doctor staggered back a step, his face pale. No one had told Elena he was there. No one had described his struggle with faith, his gradual slide from believer to skeptic over years of witnessing human suffering. "And you," Elena said softly, turning toward Father Miguel. "Your heart is like this cathedral, tall and strong and full of prayers that echo back from heaven." Father Miguel felt his legs go weak. This was impossible. Elena couldn't see them, couldn't see anything in the way humans understood sight, yet she was describing not just their appearances, but their souls. "The lady in blue explained it to me," Elena continued, her voice growing stronger, more confident. "She said that real sight isn't about seeing what's in front of you, it's about seeing what's inside everything, the love, the hope, the connections that tie all hearts together." A commotion erupted as a news crew pushed through the crowd. Camera lights blazed to life, microphones thrust forward, voices shouting questions in rapid Spanish. Elena flinched, her hands flying up to cover her face. "No," she whispered, suddenly sounding like the frightened 7-year-old she was. Too bright, too loud. But as the harsh camera lights hit her, something extraordinary happened. Elena's eyes, which had been tracking and moving but unfocused, suddenly snapped to attention. She blinked once, twice, then slowly lowered her hands. "Oh," she breathed, staring directly into the blazing television lights without squinting. "Oh, this is what you call seeing." The cathedral fell silent except for the hum of cameras and the rapid click of photographs. Elena stood perfectly still, her eyes wide and wondering, taking in her first visual images of the world. She looked at her hands first, turning them over and back again with the fascination of someone discovering fire. Then her gaze moved to her parents, and the smile that bloomed across her face was like sunrise breaking over mountains. "Mama," she whispered, reaching out to touch Maria's tear-stained cheek. "You're even more beautiful than I dreamed." But as the crowd pressed closer, as more cameras appeared and voices grew louder and more demanding, Elena's expression began to change. The wonder was still there, but underneath it, something else was growing. Confusion, overwhelm, the dawning realization that the gift she had received came with a weight she hadn't expected. "There's so much," she whispered, pressing close to her mother. "So much to see, but also so much that doesn't matter." She looked back at the statue of the Virgin Mary, and her newly seeing eyes filled with tears. "She warned me," Elena said softly. "She said the hardest part wouldn't be learning to see, it would be learning what was worth seeing." The media frenzy that erupted in the following hours threatened to swallow Elena whole. Camera crews multiplied like wildflowers after rain, reporters shouted questions in 3 languages, and pilgrims pressed forward with desperate hands reaching toward the small girl who had touched the face of a miracle. Elena sat in Father Miguel's private office behind the cathedral, her newly seeing eyes squeezed shut against the chaos. Through the thick stone walls she could hear them, hundreds of voices calling her name, car engines, the electronic whir of cameras, the shuffle of thousands of feet on ancient cobblestones. "Make it stop," she whispered, her small hands pressed against her ears. "It's too much, Papa. I can see their wants, their desperation, their hunger. It tastes bitter in my mouth." Maria knelt beside her daughter's chair, her heart breaking. This wasn't how miracles were supposed to work. Where was the joy, the simple blessing of sight restored? Instead, Elena seemed more tortured than blessed. "Mija, you don't have to see anyone you don't want to," Papa said gently. "We can go home. Pretend this never happened." "But it did happen," Elena said, opening her eyes for the first time in an hour. They were still luminous, still held that otherworldly depth, but now they carried a weight that seemed far too heavy for a 7-year-old to bear. "And she's still here." She looked toward the corner of the room where no one else could see anything unusual, but Elena smiled, the first genuine smile she'd worn since the cameras arrived. "She says I have to choose," Elena continued, her voice growing stronger. "I can keep the sight that sees bodies and faces and all the things that divide people. Or," she paused, tilting her head as if listening to a voice only she could hear. "Or I can keep the sight that sees hearts and souls and all the love that connects everything." Father Miguel leaned forward in his worn leather chair. "What does she mean, Niña?" Elena stood and walked to the small window overlooking the cathedral square. Below, the crowd had grown even larger. News vans with satellite dishes, pilgrims holding rosaries and photographs of sick relatives, curiosity seekers with cell phones raised high, all of them waiting for her. The lady in blue says that physical sight, seeing with eyes, it can blind people to what really matters, but spiritual sight, seeing with the heart. Elena placed her small palm against the cool glass. That's the gift that actually heals people. "You're talking about giving up your eyesight," Dr. Rodriguez said quietly. He had been documenting everything, but now his clipboard lay forgotten in his lap. "After 7 years of darkness, you would choose to return to it?" Elena turned back to them, and the smile on her face was radiant. "It was never darkness, Doctor. I just didn't know that before. When I couldn't see with my eyes, I learned to see with everything else. The darkness taught me to listen, to feel, to know people's hearts before I knew their faces." She walked back to her parents, taking their hands in her small ones. "When I touched Nuestra Señora, she didn't just give me sight, she gave me understanding. I can choose to see the world the way everyone else does, full of differences and judgments and things that don't really matter. Or I can see the world the way she sees it, full of connections and love and possibilities for healing." Maria's tears fell silently. "What are you saying, Mija?" "I'm saying that I want to help people, really help them, and I can't do that by being someone they stare at on television. I can do it by being someone who sees what they need most, not with eyes, but with love." Elena looked again toward the corner where the Virgin Mary's presence glowed like candlelight. "She's showing me something beautiful. All those people outside, they didn't come just to see a miracle. They came because they're hurting, and they hope that being near something holy might heal them too." Father Miguel felt his breath catch. "And you want to help them." "I want to love them," Elena corrected gently, "the way she loves them, the way she loved me enough to touch me back when I touched her face." Outside, a woman's voice rose above the crowd, calling desperately in Spanish. Elena's head snapped toward the sound, her face filled with sudden urgency. "There's a mother out there. Her baby is very sick, and the doctors say—" Elena's voice broke. "She's holding him right now, and her heart is breaking into so many pieces. I can feel it from here." Without another word, Elena walked to the office door. Her parents scrambled to follow, but she was already moving with purpose down the corridor toward the cathedral's main entrance. "Elena, wait," Maria called. "The crowds, the cameras." "Don't matter," Elena said simply. She paused at the massive wooden doors and looked back at them. None of that matters compared to a mother's broken heart. She placed her hands on the doors, and for a moment her entire being seemed to glow with the same ethereal light they had witnessed at the statue. "I choose love," she whispered. "I choose to see with her eyes, not my own." Elena moved through the silent crowd like a small ship navigating still waters. Every step was guided by an invisible current that pulled her toward the woman whose heart cried out in languages deeper than words. The hundreds of pilgrims, reporters, and curious onlookers parted before her without being asked, each face transformed by an inexplicable sense of witnessing something sacred. The woman clutching the sick baby stood at the edge of the crowd, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. Her infant son lay motionless in her arms, his tiny chest barely rising and falling, his skin the gray color of twilight. She had traveled 2 days on buses and borrowed money, carrying hope and desperation in equal measure. "Señora," Elena said softly, stopping directly in front of the woman. The mother looked down at the small girl with wonder and disbelief. "Niña, are you?" "I'm Elena," she said simply, "and this is your bebe." Elena's eyes, still luminous with that otherworldly light, focused not on the baby's frail body but on something deeper. She reached out her small hands. "May I?" The woman hesitated for only a moment before placing her dying child in Elena's arms. As Elena cradled the baby, her face grew peaceful, contemplative, as if she were reading a story written in a language only she understood. "His name is Gabriel," Elena murmured, though the woman had never spoken it aloud. "Like the angel and his heart. Oh, it's so beautiful, small and struggling, but beautiful. It wants so desperately to keep beating for you." The mother sobbed openly. "The doctors say there's nothing more they can do. His heart is too weak, too damaged." Elena looked up at her with eyes full of compassion far beyond her years. "Sometimes the heart needs to be reminded how to love itself," she said gently. "May I show him?" Without waiting for an answer, Elena placed one small hand over the baby's chest, directly over his failing heart. She closed her eyes and began to sing, not words, but a melody that seemed to come from the same place her spiritual sight originated. It was the sound of prayer made music, of love given voice. The crowd held its breath. Even the cameras had stopped recording, their operators too transfixed to remember their purpose. Under Elena's touch, baby Gabriel's skin began to warm. His breathing deepened. Color crept back into his tiny cheeks like sunrise painting the sky. And then, impossibly, his eyes opened, bright and alert and filled with the profound awareness of someone who has been touched by grace. But it was more than physical healing. As Elena sang, something spread through the entire crowd like ripples on a still pond. The desperate woman with arthritis in the back found her hands unclenching, pain leaving her joints. The elderly man with the cane discovered strength returning to his legs. A teenage girl who had been cutting herself felt for the first time in months that she was worthy of love. Elena wasn't healing their bodies, she was healing their hearts. And healed hearts, it turned out, had remarkable power over troubled bodies. "How?" Dr. Rodriguez whispered, his scientific mind reeling as he witnessed Gabriel's transformation. Elena opened her eyes and smiled at him with gentle understanding. "The same way flowers bloom, doctor. Love finds a way." She carefully handed Gabriel back to his mother, the baby now gurgling contentedly, his tiny fist wrapped around Elena's finger. "He's going to be fine," Elena said. "But more than that, you're going to be fine too. The fear that was eating at your heart, it's gone now." The woman looked down at her healthy son, then back at Elena, and fell to her knees. "Gracias, Niña Santa. Gracias." I'm not Santa, Elena said gently, helping the woman to her feet. I'm just Elena, but I know someone who is. She looked back toward the cathedral, where the statue of the Virgin Mary waited in her chapel of candles and prayers. She loves you. She loves all of you. And she asked me to make sure you know that. Over the following hours, Elena moved through the crowd like a small beacon of light. She didn't heal everyone. That wasn't the point. Instead, she touched hearts that had forgotten how to hope, whispered truths to souls that had lost their way, and reminded dozens of people that they were seen, known, and loved by something infinitely greater than their circumstances. When the sun began to set, painting the cathedral square in shades of gold and rose, Elena finally returned to her parents. She was exhausted but radiant, her face glowing with the peaceful satisfaction of purpose fulfilled. "Are you ready to go home, Mika?" Papa asked, wrapping his jacket around her small shoulders. Elena nodded, then paused. "But this is home now, too," she said, looking back at the cathedral. "Wherever people need to remember they're loved, that's home." Maria knelt beside her daughter, studying the face that had become luminous with grace. "Your eyes," she whispered. "They're different again." Elena blinked, and Maria gasped. Her daughter's eyes had returned to their original darkness, no longer tracking, no longer holding physical sight, but they held something infinitely more precious, the deep, abiding peace of someone who had found their calling. "The lady in blue said I could keep one gift," Elena explained. "Physical sight, or the ability to see hearts. I chose hearts." She smiled up at her parents. "I can still see you, the real you. That's all I need." 6 months later, Elena sat in their small garden, her fingers tracing the familiar textures of tomato leaves while she told stories to a group of neighborhood children. Word had spread quietly about the little girl who could see people's hearts, and families began bringing their troubled children to simply sit with her. She didn't perform miracles in the dramatic sense, no cameras, no crowds. Instead, she offered something more profound, the recognition that every heart deserved to be truly seen. "Elena," called Miguel, her older brother, running up the path. "There's a letter for you, from the cathedral." Elena smiled, her face turning toward the afternoon sun she couldn't see but could feel warming her cheeks. "From Father Miguel." "No, mija," her mother said softly, reading over the envelope. "It's from Rome, from the Vatican." Elena laughed, the pure, joyful sound of a child who had learned that the most extraordinary gifts often came wrapped in the simplest moments. "Tell them I'm busy," she said, reaching out to comfort a little boy who had been crying. Hearts don't wait for official recognition. And in that small garden, surrounded by children whose hearts she helped heal simply by seeing them truly, Elena continued the work she had been born to do, being a bridge between heaven and earth, one loving touch at a time. The miracle wasn't that Elena learned to see, it was that through her, we all learned to see each other differently. What would change in your world if you saw people's hearts instead of their faces? Share your thoughts below, because Elena's story reminds us that we all have the power to heal with love. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine, so do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.